Jesus. What a powerful name it is. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a powerful name it is. Nothing can stand against. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. Amen. Here we go. Blessed be your name, the land that is plentiful, where streams of abundance flow. Blessed be your name. Blessed be your name, and found in the desert place, the rock through the wilderness. Blessed be your name. Every blessing you pour out now, turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Blessed be your name. The sun's shining down on me. The world's all as it should be. Blessed be your name. Blessed be your name. On the road marked with suffering, you was made in the offering. Blessed be your name. Every blessing you pour out now, turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. You give and take away. You give and take away. My heart will choose to say, well, blessed be your name. Give and take away. You give and take away. My heart will choose to say, well, blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious not where I belong. I know it's I'm not home, and this is not where I belong. Take this world and give to Jesus. This is not where I belong. Y'all can be seated unless you're tired. In which case, you can't be.
You have to excuse me a second while I get all the adjustments adjusted here. We're streaming on Facebook, and I keep pushing the buttons wrong. That's a confession. I hope you can forgive me. And I'm great with feedback, so if you're listening on Facebook now and you want to just type something in and give us a little feedback, that'd be great. Good morning.
Good morning.
How's everybody today?
Good.
Let's pray together. Lord God, as we approach your word, I pray, Lord, you just help us to have open hearts, open minds, Lord, to understand what it is that you're saying in your word, and then to take that and make application from it, Lord. Good application. So that we're living in line with what your word says. Valid application, Father. So that when we talk about the Bible, we talk about it with deep understanding. And so, Father, I pray you help us this morning. In Christ's name. A couple of announcements before I forget. Communion will be next week, so prepare your minds and hearts for that. And then also, we're still looking for help cutting the grass. All right, now, we have 8 acres of grass.
Yay!
And it's beautiful when it's cut, but it does need to be managed. And so even if you think, oh, I can't cut all 8 acres, well, we have different zones that you could, jump in and take over. We have the triangle up here, which is it's basically just a triangle of grass. There's the puddle field, which is, dangerous and thrilling.
Fun!
It's
the alligator pond.
Thrilling, yeah, the alligator pond. So it's a thrilling opportunity to cut grass, and then of course there's the front yard. So if you need somebody to see you, cut the front yard. If you don't need anybody to see you, cut the triangle. So, and the sign-up sheet's on the welcome center. So I promise full training for anybody who volunteers. All right, hey, Independence Day. I hope you had a great time. Independence Day, lack of attendance day. It's okay, it's all right. We're going to get through it. As I was thinking about, we've been in the book of Acts for a long time. We're about to wrap up. We're about to move on to something else. We haven't really landed on what else yet, so we'll probably fill in with a couple of songs, do some Old Testament stuff, and then for the new year, I have some ideas. I've been talking with some people about some really exciting ideas. But we've been in Acts for a long time. And Acts is a book that starts in the center of Jerusalem with the gospel, the message about Jesus, the person, who he is, what he's done, his work. It starts there in Jerusalem. And then that message just explodes in the ancient world. And so you have people coming to faith just from all different backgrounds. It's an incredible time. Can you imagine? Like the church is literally, it's exploding. How many converts do we have today? And they're like, oh, we have hundreds today. Well, what are we going to do with them? How are we going to teach them? How are we going to instruct them in the faith? What happens when something goes wrong? All these first century church problems. They probably didn't have to worry about, who's going to cut the grass. They didn't worry about it. They didn't cut it, right? But it's an exciting time to be there. But there's also a lot of tension in the book of Acts. The book of Acts deals with, how does the Roman Empire deal with this new religious phenomenon? They didn't have the legal infrastructure that we have. And as I started thinking about this, I thought about the Establishment Clause of the U.S. Constitution, right? Who wouldn't, right? What does it say? You know what it says? It It says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The state, the government, cannot establish a religion. That's a good thing. That's a very good thing. You wouldn't want me appointed by the governor, would you?
No.
Right, you wouldn't. The Establishment Clause prevents the passage of any law that gives preference to or forces belief in any one religion. And it's paired with a clause that prohibits limiting the free expression of speech. So this is I'm going to give you a sticky question. So don't jump. Think first. Okay? Should prayer be allowed in schools?
Yes.
It's a tricky question. Prayer to which God? Oh, see now me as a Christian, I think sure, prayer in schools is great as long as we're praying to God. But what about if you're not a Christian? What if you are, now this is actually a thing, okay? What if you belong to the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster? You think I'm lying? It's a thing. They're called Pastafarians. It's mostly a joke. Should they pray to the Flying Spaghetti Monster? What if your kid was in school and somehow this caught on? And so now your kid's going to pray to some pagan non-entity. Are you okay with that? And so now the question gets even stickier. We're for prayer to our God in schools, the one true God, the actual God, the real God. We don't want our kids walking around praying to some spaghetti monster. That's ridiculous. What about a school ceremony where prayer is offered to Mother Earth? Are you okay with your kids doing that? I'm not. I think as long as there are exams in school, we don't have to worry our kids will be praying to someone at some point. Get rid of the exams and then we have a real problem. You see, the relationship between the church and the state has always been tense. And digging down, drilling down into these issues yields questions. This is why we have a whole bunch of Supreme Court cases about the Establishment Clause in the Constitution. When religion controls the state, bad things happen to religious minorities. This is just history. The Roman government requires emperor worship, and if you didn't worship the emperor, they would kill you. Well, as a Christian who will not worship an emperor, that's bad. When the state controls religion, it becomes political. Okay, so you have two different extremes here. In the 900s and thousands, early in church history, there was something called simony, where church offices were bought and sold by the government. Good thing, bad thing? Universally bad thing. Because then you don't have qualified ministers, you have people who are they just have money. And so they would buy church offices just to add to their list of titles. So we I like the Establishment Clause of the Constitution. I like freedom of religion. Freedom from government control. That's a good thing. The Establishment Clause is an important protection for people of faith that didn't exist in the Roman Empire. Now, the Romans were generally permissive about religion. You could follow whatever God you wanted as long as you didn't rebel and as long as you kept paying taxes, right? That's what good citizens do. They required most people to make an annual offering, just a pinch of incense burned to the deity of the emperor. Well, the one people that had an exception to that were the Jewish people. They refused to do it. Guess what? Christians refused to do it too. But as Christianity is exploding in the Roman Empire, you see the problem this creates? Jews have this natural exception, so they become Christians. They're still under that exception. Pagans come into Christianity, and now they used to give the offering to the emperor, and now they can't. And so what does the state have to do with that? They have to decide how are they going to deal with these Christians. So the Romans have to figure this out, at a time where tensions between Jewish people and Romans are very, very high. This is about 59, 60 AD, and what's about to happen in the city of Jerusalem is a revolt. The Jewish people are going to revolt against the Romans. The Romans are going to come in and crush them and destroy the Jewish temple. So it's tense, right? We're leading up to that event. We're going to look at the text of Acts 25. The Roman governor Felix, who is a bad guy, has been replaced by a man named Festus. So Felix was corrupt and ineffective. He bribed people. He abused his power. Crime actually increased under Governor Felix. He was recalled to Rome to answer complaints because what he did, he was in the capital city of Caesarea, and there were two religious minorities who were having a fight. So he entered in to stop the fight, killed them both, and took their stuff. He's bad. I mean, he's really bad. And so Rome is going to send Festus in to solve Felix's problems. Now, Festus is a good administrator, but he walks into this hornet's nest of anti-Roman tension. And he needs to understand what Felix broke in order to fix it. There are three things here that make this very complex. One element is status. Now, we've talked a lot about Paul's relative status in the last couple of weeks because he's been on trial in Roman courts. He's been accused of things in Jerusalem. So what is his status in the world? We think very highly of him. He's the Apostle Paul. Walking down the street, who is he? He's just some guy. Maybe a rebel, maybe some sort of rabble-rouser. So he doesn't have the same kind of status as the high priest from the Jerusalem temple on the other side. So in this court case, he has very high status people who are compared to his lower status. Festus has to work through this. This is also an honor-shame culture, where honor was the thing that you wanted. You wanted to be honored. And that would look like, this is my wife. She is great. See, I'm honoring her, right? But that also gives her an obligation to honor me back. Right? Thumbs up. Thanks. Okay. Thanks. I got a thumbs up. So honor is very important. Now, it's shameful in the culture to be locked up in jail. That's where Paul's been. So Paul has been locked up for 2 years in the city of Caesarea in Felix's castle, his stronghold. And so there's a real strong vibe of, oh yeah, the leader of your religion, well, Jesus, they killed him, and Paul, the guy, your main teacher, he's locked up. So how do you look? Yeah, I'm a Christian. You might feel shame in the culture. So one of the things Luke is trying to do is to justify what's going on with Paul. So reciprocity is the other element. You wanted to be able to gain favor by doing favors. And so Festus, as the Roman governor, he comes into this loaded political situation and he needs friends. So he's looking for ways to do favors to influential people. Have you ever helped somebody move?
Yeah.
What did you get in return? They moved you more. You got pizza, and when you were moving, you remember, right? You had that list of people. Hey, buddy. If you haven't gotten that phone call, you made that phone call. Now, there are a number of difficulties in Paul's case. Felix kept Paul in this very mild custody because he didn't commit any crime. Now, over and over, Luke reports, you remember Claudius Lysias, the commander of the troops in Jerusalem? What did he say about Paul? He said he's done nothing worthy of death. He doesn't do anything wrong, but he forwarded the case on to Felix. Felix listens to the case with the Jewish accusers, and he comes up with nothing. Well, we can't kill you because there's no evidence, but we'll just lock you up and forget that we have you. So Paul's been locked up for 2 years. In kind of not a strict lockup. So Felix just ignored Paul's case. Now, what did that do for Felix in the culture? Okay, you've got the high priest over in Jerusalem. Felix has Paul locked up in Caesarea. It's like a perpetual bargaining chip. The high priest needs something or wants something. Well, I'll either give it to you or not give it to you. Hey, remember Paul? Ooh, pressure, right? All those kind of things are happening. So Festus's predecessors identify the problem. Paul's legal case is all about a fight among Jews. And that's good for Paul. Because now he fits under the Jewish exemption for making an offering to the Roman emperor. So Festus is trying to earn favors. Paul has successfully shifted the trial. His trial began with, you defiled the temple. Okay, so he didn't defile the temple. He was accused of defiling the temple, and that hasn't been able to stick. Now, what's going to happen here is that the Jews are going to try to, with a new governor, shift things again. What if they can shift the trial back to Jerusalem? What if they can change the charge from an intra-Jewish theological squabble to defiling the temple again? Because if you defiled the temple in the ancient world, you were killed with no questions asked. So let's take a look at the text. There's a lot of suspense here. What's going to happen to Paul? And by extension, what's going to happen to the other Christians who are getting arrested and harassed by the Romans? So this helps us understand, the book of Acts really helps us understand the legal environment that we're in. What do we do when we're falsely accused? By the government or by people in general? What do we do? So let's take a look at the text, chapter 25, verse 1. This is Paul's trial before Festus, which puts religious freedom in danger. 3 days after arriving in the province, Festus went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem, where the chief priests and the Jewish leaders appeared before him and presented the charges against Paul. They requested Festus, as a favor to them, to have Paul transferred to Jerusalem, for they were preparing an ambush to kill him along the way. Festus answered, Paul is being held at Caesarea. I myself am going there soon. Let some of your leaders come with me, and if the man has done anything wrong, they can press charges against him there. After spending 8 or 10 days with them, Festus went down to Caesarea. The next day he convened the court and ordered that Paul be brought before him. When Paul came in, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him. They brought many serious charges against him, but they could not prove them. Then Paul made his defense. I have done nothing wrong against the Jewish law, or against the temple, or against Caesar. Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand trial before me there on these charges? Paul answered, I am now standing before Caesar's court where I ought to be tried. I have not done any wrong to the Jews, as you yourself know very well. If, however, I am guilty of doing anything deserving death, I do not refuse to die. But if the charges brought against me by these Jews are not true, no one has the right to hand me over to them. I appeal to Caesar. After Festus had confirmed this counsel, he declared, you have appealed to Caesar you will go. So now Governor Felix, remember, taken back the rule for corruption. Jerusalem is 6 years away from this revolt, and Governor Festus is looking, you see in the text, it repeats twice. He's looking for a way to do them a favor. He's looking for a way to help them out. They're looking for a way to kill Paul. So Festus, he's a good administrator. He enters into the situation. Within 3 days, he's like, where are the open cases? What are the problems? He gets back to Caesarea. The next day, he sees Paul. He's a good administrator. Why do you suppose Felix kept him locked up for 2 years? Was there like a backlog of legal cases? Was there a lot of stuff going on? Or no, it was just shenanigans. And so he's looking for ways, Festus is now looking for ways to build relationships. He's willing to accommodate Jewish customs. At the same time, he's really careful. So he's coming into this situation. He doesn't want to set a bad precedent. So the Jews in Jerusalem say, hey, bring Paul here, and we'll talk about his case. And Festus says, no, I'm the Roman governor. The Roman capital is Caesarea. You guys come with me. So he's a good administrator. He's not setting any bad precedents. Paul has 3 responses to this litany of accusations against him. He says, I haven't done anything against Jewish law. So Festus should not turn him over to the Jews. Paul knows. If he gets turned over to the Jews, what's going to happen? They're trying to kill him. He just barely escaped an assassination attempt 2 years ago. So he's not in a hurry to go back to Jerusalem. He says, I've had no violation of the Jewish temple. There's nothing worthy of death, just like Claudius Lysias wrote in his letter to Felix. There's no violation of Roman law, otherwise Felix would have handled it. And so the new governor comes in, and he's trying to give Paul he's trying to do a favor for the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem. And Paul is kind of left there stuck. They want to kill Paul and shame the Christian movement. Because now, if they can kill the founder and they can kill the main teacher, all of Christianity looks like it's bad. Right? The Romans say it's bad. What do the Romans say according to Luke? It's innocent. There's nothing wrong with it. So if they can kill Paul, that will reduce the number of people that are losing to Christianity. Festus needs help from the Jewish leaders, so he's looking for a way to do them a favor. Now let me ask you this question. Have you ever gone out to lunch with some friends, and it's time to split the bill 3 or 4 ways, however many guys are there, and then it's time to pay the bill, and some guy says, oh, I forgot my wallet. And then some other guy says, oh man, I forgot my wallet too. Third guy says, oh, I'm out of cash. And they're all looking at you. What do you do? You lose your wallet really quick. That's the situation Paul's in. The Jewish leaders want to kill him. Festus wants to do a favor, and they're looking for Paul's wallet. And so Paul is stuck. He says, I appeal to Caesar. He shifts the venue all the way to the city of Rome, where God already told him he was going to go. Changing the venue has risk. If Paul goes back to Jerusalem, he could be assassinated, subjected to false witnesses, or the trial could get shifted back to defiling the temple. So he has good reasons not to believe he'll get fair trouble. In the 1600s, a man named Thomas Hobson rented horses. He had about 40 horses in Cambridge, England, and he had a rule that you could only take the horse in the first stall you came to. So he had all of these great horses, but they went out sort of one by one. That way, the good horses get the same amount of use as the bad horses. And he was such a stickler about this that it became a problem. Hobson's choice. Take it or leave it. Have you ever had a Hobson's choice? Have you ever had dinner with your parents when you were a kid? Take it or leave it. There have been several instances, probably in the past couple of weeks, where I've given Hobson's choice. You can either have this or nothing. Well, that's what Paul's stuck with. He can appeal to Caesar, or he can be killed. And so he doesn't really have a choice. He's going to use the Roman legal system to preserve his life so that he can continue the mission. You know, good people disagree about the way the state and church work together, or don't work together. Here in the book of Acts, the Roman legal system protects Paul's life. And so if we wanted to develop a systematic theology of all the ways that the state and church can interact, that's a much bigger question. Here in this text, the state protects Paul's life. And so we can extrapolate from that, what is one role of the government when it comes to the life of the Christian? Don't kill them. Please. And if you're aware of history, maybe not U.S. history, but history in the world, people have gotten killed for their faith all the time. And so I think the Establishment Clause of the U.S. Constitution is great. The state shouldn't be involved in religion. We should support the free exercise of religion, even religions we don't agree with. Paul had no vote, but we do, so we should vote in a way that supports the freedom of religion. We should think carefully and deeply about the way we want the power of the state to promote or not promote specific interests. I'd rather avoid Hobson's choice about my faith when the choice is backed by the force and power of the government. And so I'm going to suggest a couple of books to you for you to run out to the bookstore and get. All right? The first is called To Change the World. It's by James Davison Hunter, And it's really good. He talks about the role of Christianity, no matter what the government is. And the second is Politics According to the Bible by Wayne Grudem. Wayne Grudem is a systematic theologian, and so he's going to deal with the larger question of how Christians should or should not be political. So Paul's trial before Festus shows us religious freedom in danger. The second point is that religion is a religious investigation by Festus and Agrippa. Take a look at verse 13. A few days later, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea to pay their respects to Festus. Since they were spending many days there, Festus discussed Paul's case with the king. He said, "There is a man here whom Felix left as a prisoner. When I went to Jerusalem, the chief priests and elders of the Jews brought charges against him and asked that he be condemned. I told them that it is not the Roman custom to hand over anyone before they have faced their accusers and have had an opportunity to defend themselves against the charges. When they came here with me, I did not delay the case, but convened the court the next day and ordered the man to be brought in. When his accusers got up to speak, they did not charge him with any of the crimes I had expected. Instead, they had some points of dispute with him about their own religion and about a dead man named Jesus whom Paul claimed was alive. I was at a loss how to investigate such matters. So I asked if he would be willing to go to Jerusalem and stand trial there on these charges. When Paul made his appeal to be held over for the emperor's decision, I ordered him held until I could send it to Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I would like to hear this man myself. He replied, tomorrow you will hear him. You know what's amazing about this little piece of scripture? A king is going to hear the gospel. A king is going to listen to the Apostle Paul explain Jesus. Now listen to, I'm going to go back here. I'm sorry, I'm off my notes, but I'm going to go back here. He had some points of dispute about a dead man named Jesus who Paul claimed was alive. Isn't that Christianity right there? That Jesus is alive. That death couldn't hold him. And the theological explanation for that is that you and I, by our relationship with him, are right with God. That's amazing. And Paul's going to be able to talk about that to the king. He's not to Caesar yet. He's to King Agrippa. And so the Roman government doesn't have a consistent policy, a coherent policy, or a consistent way to address Christianity until about 250. Okay, so we're in the 50s. Okay, not the 1950s, the regular 50s, the 00050s. And so the Roman Empire doesn't quite know what to do with Christianity. They don't develop a coherent policy until 200 years later, and that's when they decide Christians should just be killed. So we've got a couple hundred years before that happens. And then in 313, 63 years after that policy, Christianity becomes a legal religion and actually becomes popular, and then has to deal with sudden popularity. So at this time in history, Christianity is regarded as a sect of Judaism. They weren't required to make an offering to the deity of Caesar. So persecution at this time in history is kind of sporadic. It's case by case, it's place by place, it's person by person. Later historical evidence reveals some of this tension. What is the government going to do with these Christians? There are a set of letters preserved between a man named Pliny, who is a governor of Bithynia, and the emperor Trajan. And so Pliny wants to know, what do I do with these Christians? He sends a letter to the emperor, and he asks 3 questions. Should we treat young Christians differently from older ones? Okay? Does denying Christianity result in a pardon? Is the name of Christianity itself enough to condemn the accused, or do they have to be associated with some other crime? And so Pliny has this problem. There are people coming to him with complaints. Hey, there's a Christian. I don't know what to do. Is there an official policy here that I'm supposed to do something? What is their crime? Being Christian. And so Trajan writes back, and he says, okay, look, don't seek out Christians for trial. That's good. No hunting Christians yet. If the accused is a Christian, they must be punished. If the accused deny they are a Christian and prove by worshiping the gods, the Roman pagan gods, then they are pardoned. Anonymous accusations should not be considered. So Trajan writes back and he gives them a little bit of advice. Yes, persecute the Christians, but don't go looking for them. Well, okay. This is in the 100s when this exchange happens. So on the one hand, Christians were not hunted down. On the other, being a Christian was enough to get you accused, tried, and killed. But, and this is where, okay, let's step into the church side of things. Suppose you're a Christian, you get caught, you're on trial, you decide to recant your Christianity, tell a lie, offer a pinch of incense to the emperor. Can the church take you back? What if you were a minister and you lied, offered a pinch of incense? Does that invalidate all of the marriage ceremonies and baptisms that you did? This is a historical church problem. I'm not making any of this up. How do you deal with this? It's a big, sticky problem. And so there's this advice. So what we're illustrating here is that it's tough to know what to do with the Christians. And so King Agrippa and his sister Bernice are going to visit Festus. This is a regular occurrence in the ancient world. You know, people of substance would always travel around and, you know, drink each other's wine, I guess. I don't know. I forgot my wallet. So Herod Agrippa II is the great-grandson of Herod the Great. He is Jewish, so he understands Judaism. He is in the company of his sister. He was educated in Rome. So on the one side, he knows Judaism, and on the other side, he knows what it's like to be a Roman. He's the perfect guy to help Festus write a letter that explains the political problem that he's stuck in a way that makes sense. So he can identify the reason why this Roman citizen wasn't released and sent to Rome instead for judgment. Agrippa wants to hear Paul. This, so far in the book of Acts, is the highest Roman official who's going to listen to the gospel. And that's just incredible. It's an unusual opportunity for Paul. He only got there because he got arrested. He's stuck for 2 years in something he doesn't like and doesn't want for the purpose of presenting the gospel to people who wouldn't otherwise hear it. Have you ever had an unusual opportunity to talk to somebody about Jesus? When Ruth Ann and I were adoptive parents, and so during our home study, we had to have a state worker come in and ask us about our family. And so they started asking us questions. Tell us about your family. How did you guys get here? And then, what makes you guys functional? What makes you guys a healthy family? I didn't even think about it. I said, Jesus. I said, our faith makes all the difference. My marriage to her, we're actually when we got married, we were very different people. She's seen the light.
It's okay, I'll get more jewelry, folks.
This is regular, so. Sorry, I distract myself sometimes. In this case study, you're very different people. How are you functional? Our faith makes all the difference. Our confidence that God is who He says He is, our belief that God says, you're going to have to go work this out, has brought us to work it out more than once. That's just history too. And so, oh man, I skipped this whole joke. Can you go back a slide?
Must have been a good one.
Do you remember this? Okay, this is a historical joke. I've been talking about Governor Festus, right? How many of you know who this is? Yeah? Okay, how many of you don't know at all? Yeah, do you know why? Generations. This is Festus from Gunsmoke. Yep. So if you grew up watching reruns of Gunsmoke, this is Festus. It's the only picture of Festus I can find. Sorry. So Ruby and I are going through this case study with this state social worker, and we're talking about Jesus. It was an opportunity to share about our faith. It was an unusual opportunity. You wouldn't expect that a state worker would ask those kind of questions or listen to the answers. We got approved to adopt kids. We needed Jesus after that too. Unusual opportunities come up all the time. You never know when you're going to have an opportunity to talk to somebody about your faith. I usually carry a book with me when I expect, okay, I got a doctor's appointment, I stick a book in my bag, and I know there's going to be some wait time. More than once, somebody has said, hey, what are you reading? Usually it's some nerdy Bible trivia guide book. Oh, I'm reading this. Huh, what's that about? Well, here we go. You open the door, I'll drive the truck through it. Or someone asked me if I was going to be able to take it easy this weekend. Well, I'm working. Oh, what do you do? I'm a pastor. Or you could say, hey, what do you do this weekend? Go to church. Really, what church? I restock my Pathway business cards before I go places when I know people are going to have to talk to me, so I can say, I invited 2 people to church yesterday for dinner. Just, you never know. You never know when an unusual opportunity is going to come up. You never know when that person is going to be thinking about God, thinking about things of faith, and you're going to be in that situation to just say, oh, hey, Paul didn't plan to talk to King Agrippa. He just showed up. Paul didn't know that Felix was going to get recalled and he was going to have to deal with Festus and get back into court. He got back into court and it became a good thing. So the things that we can do about this, take care of a goofy book about Jesus. Invite somebody to ask you. A lot of times we don't talk about the faith for a couple of different reasons. We don't understand the gospel. We're afraid that we'll be hit with a question that we don't know. I can be a street shout out. I don't know the answer either. But I know people. We think about, we do understand our story. Start with your story. How did God make a difference in your life? We tend to get apathetic. We tune into our TVs and phones a little bit too much. We get afraid. What if somebody asks me a question I don't know the answer to? I love it when somebody asks me a question I don't know the answer to. It's an opportunity for me to learn something. Well, you should know that. You're a pastor. What is that? That's not in here. I checked. Maybe not all the footnotes, but I checked. It's okay not to know stuff. It's actually liberating to admit that you don't know stuff. So anyway, pray for opportunities. Pray for those unusual opportunities to talk about your faith. Do one thing that puts you out in your community. Don't go to church. I mean, come to church on Sunday, but then during the week, Dan and I were talking just this week, and we need to do one new thing, just to meet new people. What do you want to do? We haven't done it yet. We haven't decided. But there's always opportunity. And what I found? I found myself saying, well, I'm busy. We're all busy. Oh, I got a house I'm trying to sell. So everybody on Facebook, near my house, call me. And so on Sunday, I go and work on my house. I stay through Monday. I work on my house. I come home Monday. I'm tired. So don't do something on Monday. Do something on Tuesday. There's room in my life to do one new thing that puts me in contact with people that don't know Jesus. I don't want to live with excuses. Put your phone down and say hi to folks. Oh, if you've been here more than a minute, I'm an introvert and meeting people is tough for me. Practice. I guess. And so in Paul's trial before Festus, religious freedom is in danger. There's this religious investigation by Festus and Agrippa, and Agrippa, the king, the Jewish king who gets it, he's going to say, let's hear it. And so Paul's going to have this opportunity to talk to him. Take a look at verse 23. There's this religious investigation by the entire court of Festus and Agrippa. Verse 23 says, the next day Agrippa and Bernice came in with great pomp and entered the audience room with the high-ranking military officers and the prominent men of the city. At the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. Festus said, King Agrippa and all who are present with us, you see this man. The whole Jewish community has petitioned me about him in Jerusalem and here in Caesarea, shouting that he ought not to live any longer. I found that he had nothing deserving of death. But because he made his appeal to the emperor, I decided to send him to Rome. But I had nothing definite to write to his majesty upon him. Therefore I have brought him before all of you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that as a result of this investigation I may have something to write. For I think it is unreasonable to send a prisoner on to Rome without specifying the charges against him. not only is Paul in front of King Agrippa, not only is Paul in front of the governor, they brought everyone. And this isn't a trial. Paul doesn't have to fear for his life. They're just trying to find out more about Christianity so they can write an intelligent letter to the Roman emperor about whether it is or isn't a threat. Can you imagine? Hi, Pastor so-and-so, we'd like you to come downtown and speak to everybody. Yes, Lord. You have to do it. Right? And then help me, Lord, follows right on that. And then help me. As Paul appears before Festus and Agrippa, it's an opportunity to take care of rumors about Christianity. Did you know that in the first century, you know what they said about Christians in the first century? They said that we were atheists, that we did not believe in any God, because Christians didn't go to pagan temples. You couldn't say, hey, what God do you worship? And they'd show you a statue. We don't worship statues. We worship the one true living God. Jesus raised from the dead. Well, can you imagine? They're like, we don't get it. You must be an atheist. That's what they said about Christians in the first century. That's not all. You are my brothers and sisters in Christ, right? So brothers and sisters. In the first century, in the meals that we would share together were not called potlucks. They were called love feasts. So brothers and sisters having a love feast, everybody thought that Christians committed incest. No, we don't do that here. I've been involved in church for a long time. Never seen that done. Never. We don't do that. But in the first century, that's what they said about us. That's not all. They thought we were cannibals. They thought we ate literal flesh and drank literal blood. Why? Because Jesus gave his body and blood for you, and we share in that in communion, where we symbolically represent Jesus' body and blood. But we don't eat people. I tried to find a suitable image for cannibalism that I could show you as I talked about this. There is not one on all of the internet. Now, what added to the cannibal rumor, in the first century, children, unwanted children, were exposed. So they would take a baby that they didn't want. Maybe it was born crippled, or maybe it was, they didn't like the gender or whatever, and they would take that baby and they would leave it in the woods for the animals. Or they would leave it on the side of the road. You know what Christians did? They picked those babies up. Now, if you're watching from the outside, you're like, okay, we think they're cannibals, and they're picking up babies on the side of the road. They must be cannibals. They're compassionate. And so these are the things that Paul, and so imagine this, okay, if these rumors filter up into the elite levels, into the levels of government, the government is like, yeah, we should probably kill these people, they're bad. They're doing things that are opposed to society. Well, people don't think that we're atheistic cannibals anymore, but they do think that we're different. Delightfully different, I think. But if you came in from the outside, you might think, wow, why are these people all happy? That's weird. Why are they singing those songs? Now, I'm usually in the front, so I don't know if any of you are, going bananas in the back of the room, but, why are they so excited? Forgiveness will do that to you, right? People don't think we're atheists and cannibals, but they do think that we're strange. And so Paul has this opportunity to enter into the elite, to talk about who Christians are, what they believe, and why they believe it. We don't eat people. We celebrate that God sent his son Jesus to die on our behalf. That's what we're so excited about. We celebrate because theologically that provides us with forgiveness from our wrongdoing, and it gives us entrance into a new relationship with Almighty God. And in that new relationship, you and I are brother and sister. That's an exciting place to be. So Paul's appeal to Caesar addresses the role of government for the Christian, protection. That's what the government is supposed to do according to this text in Acts. The government protects us and should protect us from unjust punishment. Paul defends his innocence and continues to witness to the person and work of Jesus even to the upper levels of society. If influential people listen to a reasonable understanding of the Christian faith, they'll understand enough to prevent further persecution. And so what Acts is doing is it's giving a template. It's instructing people who will face court charges in that world. And it's instructing us today, how do we deal with our relationship to the government? The government should protect people of faith, all faiths. The Establishment Clause in the Constitution is a good thing. The state should promote religion. And there will always be debate about where that line is. Is it okay to pray in schools or not pray in schools? Can we have a designated prayer time where people go off to separate places and pray to separate deities? How many? Which ones are legitimate or illegitimate? You know, if the flying spaghetti monster gets enough votes, do they have to pray to him? Does he have to have a separate place for it? That's ridiculous. But it's important that the state not be involved in establishing a religion, because often the state gets involved. That's not politics, that's just history. Our role is to be ready for gospel opportunities. The mission that God gave us as a church is to reach out into our communities with the message about Jesus. Over and over and over again, folks, that is the one thing that we're supposed to be about. And so we don't want to get distracted by politics or by good works or by anything. We want to stay focused on the mission that God gave us, to spread the gospel, to look for those gospel opportunities in dangerous places. If we're going to ask to hear Paul, Paul's going to bring it. Paul's going to speak with boldness and confidence before the elite of that society. Who's going to ask you? Whether you're carrying a book around or whether you're doing stuff for the weekend or whatever it is you've got going on, who's going to ask you? Maybe you won't have to speak before kings. We all have to speak. Maybe you won't have to be on trial for your life. Maybe you won't face Hobson's choice about your religion. But we will have to speak. So God grants the boldness to speak. Who might ask you? You can always trust that God is already at work in the minds and hearts and lives of the people around you. As Sean and the team come back up, as the guys get ready for the offering, let's pray together. Father, we thank you so much for all that you do. We thank you, Father, that we live in a country where we have the freedom of religion and the opportunity to talk to people about our faith. Help us, Lord, to talk intelligently, kindly, openly, and with great love and compassion for the people around us. Help us to do your will. I pray, Father, for those people who are not able to be here today, that they would have an enjoyable and refreshing time of vacation, Father. I thank you so much, Lord, for your Son, Jesus. That by his death on the cross, you've given us freedom from our sins. You've given us forgiveness. You've given us new life. And so, Father, help us to live that new life as your people. And as your people, Father, help us to sing with joy and happiness and love. Help us, Father, to love those around us. And Lord, we just praise you for all that you've done. In Christ's name, amen.
So this one is 238 in your blue book up here. So if you'd like to sing that.
to hold. Our newborn baby, and feel the pride and joy he gives, but greater still, that all assurance, this child can face uncertain days, because Christ lives, because he lives. I can face tomorrow, because he lives. All fear is gone, because I know he owns the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives. And then one day I'll cross the river, I'll find life's final war with pain, and then as death gives way to victory, I'll see the lights of glory, and I'll know he lives, because he lives. I can face tomorrow, because he lives. All fear is gone, because I know he owns the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives, because he lives, because he lives. I can face tomorrow, because he lives. All fear is gone, because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives. And life is worth the living just because he lives.
And then we have one more song before we get going, but this is Amazing Grace by Chains Are Gone.